I have been at this a long time. My first job in Idaho was to investigate the lead poisoning epidemic in the Silver Valley. And at one time, the Silver Valley was the most dangerous place for childhood lead poisoning in the United States. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but the important thing is today, there's going to be a decision made in about 30 days regarding the Stibnite Gold Project permit. And should that permit be approved as the DEQ has recommended, we will become the most dangerous state in the United States for pediatric cancer. No other state has proposed doing what DEQ proposes doing to accommodate this mine, and that decision is before the Board of Environmental Quality and be made the next 30 days. The decision is about whether the risk for cancer can be allocated across the life of a child, or does the mine have the right to allocate all of that risk across the life of a mine. So that's why we call this life of mine or life of child. Let's go to the next slide. No matter what, Idaho is about to embark on a new era of mining. It's going to be led by critical metals and gold. It's not the first rodeo for Idaho. We were the leading producer of lead, zinc, and silver for the last century. We have a tremendous legacy there. Much of it proud, but some of it very difficult. We did have the worst epidemic of childhood lead poisoning ever in the United States up there. We spent about $240 million now making that community as safe as any other community in the United States. It took almost 30 years to accomplish that cleanup. And we are the second largest Superfund site in the nation. We're going to spend about another $800 million cleaning up the tailings that were dumped in the river and ended up in Lake Coeur d'Alene. So we have a dark side to the mining industry as well. And there was a particular awful lesson that was learned at that time and resulted as a combination of very high metals prices, ineffectual regulations, and corporate greed. This company was allowed by the state of Idaho to increase its production capacity by about 40%. But it didn't require that the air pollution control facilities be increased at the same time. And there was a promise by that company that they would not operate at full production capacity until their pollution control equipment was completed. But under some extraordinary circumstances, metals prices went sky high for a 6-month period. And during that time, they did run as fast as they could. They caught their pollution control equipment on fire, and they ran for 6 months without pollution control. And that's when they poisoned these kids. The awful lesson was they actually had a meeting, and they calculated how much profits they would lose versus how much money they would lose if those parents of those children that they were going to poison would sue them. They did a cost-benefit analysis. It looked like they were going to make a lot of money, so they continued to operate. That's when that cartoon came out, and that's what a series of articles was about. It was in 1990. The fire was in 1974. It was 16 years before the public actually learned about that decision. So we had a situation where high metals prices, ineffectual regulations, and corporate greed resulted in an unprecedented epidemic of severely poisoned children. Next slide. We're moving into that same territory today. We could become the most dangerous state for pediatric cancer. That's because of the way this mine is being permitted. Now, this story is not about cancer at Stibnite or Yellow Pine or McCall. What's happening is the state is changing the rules statewide, and it's going to apply to every county in the state. It's going to apply to every family in the state, and it's going to put all children in Idaho at risk if this becomes the precedent for the way to handle mining permitting. So what kind of mine really is this mine? That depends on who you listen to. You can hear from the public relations people about what this mine is about. You can read all the submittals to the regulators about what the mine's consultants tell that this mine is about, or you can review the disclosures that our investors are made. Let's go to the next slide. If you listen to the public relations on this project, it's characterized many different ways. It's a fisheries restoration project. It's going to provide critical metals for our national defense, green metals for environmental cleanup. It's going to produce antimony, and it's going to be paid for by gold. If you're an investor on Wall Street, this is a gold mine. Current prices, there's $12 billion worth of gold out there with a sprinkle of antimony to go with it. Next slide. If you're talking about what minerals are produced here, or you're interested in the health aspects and the environmental threat posed, or what we need to manage as wastes for the next 100 years at this site, this is an arsenic mine. There'll be 500,000 tons of arsenic ore produced for this mine, much more than the antimony. 200 to 1,000 pounds of arsenic for each ounce of gold that will be produced. Next slide. Why is that? It has to do with the type of ore. This is a kind of ore discovered originally in Carlin, Nevada, and that's where they learned how to process these types of ores. You could say it's what we once called fool's gold. but it's an arsenic iron ore with microscopic amounts of gold in it, and it's tough to get that gold out of that ore. It requires extensive processing. This is more than a mine. This is a factory that will be built out there with high pressure, high temperature autoclaves and lots of cyanide that's combined to get that gold out of that arsenic. The arsenic undergoes extensive conversion during that process and creates many toxic arsenic compounds as it's processed. Next slide. This is the Carlin Gold facility, Barrick Gold Strike mine in Nevada. This is the mine they want to build at Stibnite. You can see on the scale there that that factory we're talking about is a half mile across. It's a huge operation. There's about 3 of these down in Nevada. And Nevada is, if it were a country, it would be the 4th largest gold producer in the world. Most of the U.S. gold is produced down there now from these types of ores. This type of facility works down there. It can comply with the air pollution rules because it's in the middle of the high desert. I grew up down there. The wind blows all the time. And that facility can be built here. The basic problem we have is that facility cannot be built at Stibnite in these mountain valleys where you don't have the air dispersion for those emissions, not without changing our cancer rules, not without interpreting our cancer rules differently. That's the main issue here. You can't build this facility there without changing our cancer rules. Next slide. So you think the agencies would want to know how much arsenic there is, why there's so much, where's it going to go, and would we care? You know, incredibly, neither the Forest Service or the IDEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, have calculated how much arsenic this facility will dispose of. They've been asked repeatedly over the last 5 years to do it. They have not done it. So the numbers I'm going to show you are obtained from back calculations out of the potential investor disclosures that were made for this mine, because they track arsenic closely because they're tracking the gold that's in it. So you can back calculate how much arsenic there is. We've done that. A couple hundred hours of my retirement time went into that. Next slide. A lot of arsenic, both in the overburden and low-grade ores that they remove to get to the high-quality arsenic gold ores. And there's a lot of arsenic in those ores. Altogether, there'll be somewhere between 600,000 tons and 2 million tons of arsenic that will be produced and disposed of on this site. Next slide. Talk about the Bunker Hill, where I worked for many, many years. Let's just take a quick comparison. Over 100 years from 100 mines, the Coeur d'Alene Mining District produced 120 million tons of tailings. Now up there, half of it was discharged into the rivers, and that's what we're cleaning up, is that half that was distributed throughout the Coeur d'Alene drainage into Lake Coeur d'Alene. This facility in 16 years will produce the same amount of tailings, 120 million tons. These tailings are going to be behind a 450-foot dam, earthen dam, above the South Fork River. Next slide. So just one last look at the Coeur d'Alene Basin before we leave. About 40% of that waste I talked about is on the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene, where we hope to keep it. Wasn't a lot of arsenic up there, only 12,000 tons. Remember, we're talking about 500,000 tons here. But the greatest threat, Coeur d'Alene Lake, is if this lake goes what you call eutrophic and the conditions in the bottom change, the greatest threat is the release of that arsenic into the lake. The whole lake management plan is about trying to keep that arsenic on the bottom of the lake as long as we possibly can. A little bit of arsenic can go a long way. It's a dangerous poison. Next slide. And if you permit mines, you don't have to have done it for 50 years to know that almost all mines in the western United States are limited in their size and the amount of emissions they are allowed to release, most often by lead and arsenic. We permit them so they don't put out too much lead and arsenic. Lead because of neurocognitive deficits for children. It causes learning disabilities and subtle brain damage. And we permit them on the basis of arsenic for cancer. In both cases, pregnant women and children are the most vulnerable and susceptible population. So these permits are about protecting children and pregnant women. With mines, with arsenic and lead particularly, it's not only what you breathe in, but when these facilities emit large quantities of dust, that dust falls on surfaces. Children put their hands on those surfaces, and then they put their hands in their mouths. Kids take in about 10 times as much lead and arsenic in these communities through ingestion, incidental ingestion. It's called, and this isn't dirty kids, this is all kids put their hands in their mouths. About 10 times more than they actually get through breathing. And arsenic is particularly dangerous because it is a carcinogen both by breathing and by ingestion. Kids eat dirt. It's number one thing you got to remember if you're going to permit one of these mines. Next slide. So there's been 3 drafts of this permit. It's not me just talking today about something that's going to happen in 2 weeks. The first one was submitted 2019, 5 years ago. The first permit is what brought me out of retirement to review this mine. Incredibly, even today, it's hard to believe that the first permit exempted 99% of all the arsenic this place was going to emit from any regulation. That's why they never calculated how much they were, because there was no intent to regulate it whatsoever. A lot of people in this room were involved in making that public and known, and DEQ did relent and did say you have to permit arsenic. For the next round of permits that came in was just really recalculations, redefinitions, and very importantly, promises not to operate at full speed. They're still wanting to build this giant facility, and as they have been being required to consider arsenic, most of the permit limitations they're proposing are just promises not to operate at full speed. They still want to build their original facility that they wanted to. When the second round was sent back for them to submit a third permit, DEQ and the applicant agreed that they could not build this facility without changing the cancer regulations or the interpretation of the regulations that we have. That's where we sit today. That's been under appeal and discussed back and forth with additional hearings, and the board will decide in 30 days whether to grant this permit or not. This is the red line decision, life of mine or life of child. Next slide. So how does this law work? It's very difficult to explain. It's regulated by risk. As a standard, it's used for mining, for water, for food, for all kinds of cancer calculations and consumer goods that are done over the country to try and keep that risk at less than 1 in a million. Tough number, hard to describe, often a lot of disinformation about this. But basically, it goes like this. You are allowed to breathe in so much arsenic over the course of a 70-year lifetime, and you will be at that risk at the end of your 70 years. Total that you can do. Try and explain this with these risk cups at the bottom. But what the current rule requires is that you dribble in this risk over 70 years. Each year you can have 1/70th of the total arsenic that you're allowed to stay safe. It's an incredibly safe standard. Right now we have one of the safest standards in the country. It's prescriptive is what the term that we use technically. So we dribble that risk in. I show up there at age 2, you just have a little bit of risk. The cup is just barely full. The rest of that empty cup means that you have protection against carcinogens, against cancer. A lot of protection for children. As you get older, protection goes down, but by the time you're an adolescent, you still have a lot of glass left to fill. When you're in your reproductive age years as an adult, you still have half a glass to go. And when you finally get old like me, your glass is full, but a little bit more doesn't matter that much at my age. That's the design of this law. As it was put together 30 years ago, it's worked fine in Idaho for 30 years. Next slide. There's 2 exceptions. Both of those allow you to increase the amount of arsenic that you can breathe in by 10 times. Pertinent one here is if a company demonstrates it has done every conceivable technology, applied everything that they can do to minimize those emissions, and they still can't meet it, they can get a bigger glass to fill. 10 times bigger. It's not ideal because that old 1 in a million risk you actually hit at 7 years old, and everybody carries a 10 times greater risk throughout life as a result of that. But we still dribble it out over 70 years. Next slide. This is what this real change says, that a mine or any, because it applies to all carcinogens from any source statewide, can impose that entire 70-year lifetime total during the life of the mine, not the life of the child. Which in the extreme case here, they testified that it can apply all the way down to 6 years of age. You can take that whole 70 years worth of exposure, you can put it in a 6-year-old child. And the assumption is, well, we can load that kid up now, but it'll average out over the rest of their life and they'll be fine. Those risk classes we fill up. Those children will be at a 1 in a million risk while they're still in diapers. And they'll be at a 1 in 100,000 risk for the rest of their life at 7 years old. Their cup runneth over for lifetime. Next slide. So that technically is called dose averaging. You have to assume that a large exposure over a short time is the same as a small exposure over a long time. That's just not the case. It's not the case for fetus, infants, toddlers, and adolescents. They have smaller bodies, they have developing organ systems, and they eat a lot more dirt than adults do. It's important to note arsenic crosses the placenta. Arsenic exposure, prenatal and in the early years of life, can manifest 25 years later. Induces cancers in several systems, skin, lung, liver, bladder. And anyone that tells you they understand this is not telling you the story, because science and medicine does not understand all the mechanisms of arsenic cancer. This is one of the most potent carcinogens there are. One of the 2 metals that is most carcinogenic. And this is all on a background of childhood cancer increasing nationwide over the last 40 years. While many adult cancers are decreasing, children are getting cancer more often. It has to do with our lifestyle, has to do with a lot of chemicals in society, has to just do with the way we live. So we have a background that we need to consider as well. Children are not small adults. Next slide. It does affect almost every system. And just to reiterate, we're at the arsenic red line here. This facility wants to squeeze out 70 years of allowable arsenic into 16-year life of mine. There's been no public input on this, not on the statewide implications of this. Most of this has been done within the bureaucracy about this single permit. This is a statewide issue that should be, if we do want to have a law where we accommodate these things, then it should be up front. Governor should lay out why he wants to do this, and the legislature should change the rule, not do it buried in some permit at one single mine. Next slide. So this is a precedent that threatens our state. Next slide. Now the board recognized this. We have hope that our board will stand by the rule and protect our children. They sent this permit back for reconsideration 2 years ago. These are some of the statements the board members made when they told their agency to go reconsider this because, I'll read it, suggests there's a significant ignorance about cancer carcinogens and carcinogenesis in the agency. This is a short-sighted adjustment factor for the Stibnite Gold Project. It's misleading analysis that greatly underestimates the actual cancer risk. That's not me speaking. That's the board. Said this 2 years ago when they set it back. So that's where we're at now. If the board holds its position, Idaho can be proud of that. And we can give them all the support in the world. If the board doesn't hold their position, we really need to make our state tell us why they're doing this. Why are they deciding? Are they deciding on the life of the mine or the life of the child? Next slide. Now, part of this is a joke. My family's 6th generation Idaho, and there's a lot of Idahans in this room, I know. You always have to blame everything on the federal government. Except in this case, the real problem here, the real sad event here is a failure by the Payette National Forest, because there were other alternatives that could have been considered that I know it's not popular among some folks to consider this mine at all, but there are ways this mine could be built safely. They could build a smaller mine and operate it for a longer period of time. When they got the tenfold increase in emissions and they were told they couldn't meet it at that point, they shouldn't have come back and said, let's change the rules. They should have followed the rules, because what the rules say is you come back with a smaller facility that can fit in that valley. They wouldn't do that. They still wanted to build that big one out there. That's why the cancer rules needed changed. The other one that wasn't considered is that these arsenic gold ores could be concentrated here, and those could be shipped to Nevada. Next slide. To this facility. That would take the arsenic and the gold to Nevada, where it could be disposed of in this place, which has 10 to 100 times that much down there already, and probably is willing to accept it. Because another thing that the Forest Service never acknowledged, or they never read the investment disclosure documents, this facility had the first right of refusal to accept the arsenic and the gold concentrates if it couldn't be built in Idaho. And that alternative was never evaluated, never recognized, despite the Forest Service being told repeatedly, look at this option. They wouldn't do it. So it is a false narrative that we must choose between economic development and public health, because there are alternatives. We can have both. But this one is not one of those. This one is causing us to have to make a decision about whether this mine gets the cancer risk or whether our children are protected from the cancer risk. That's it. Thank you.